Hi, I'm Craig Dumont with Dominion Leadership Network, and with me today is Jeremy Sexton. He is the pastor of Church of the Good Shepherd in North Augusta, South Carolina, just a little ways from where they play the Masters. And we're here for a big event, a major, if you will, of biblical topics. Jeremy, thanks for taking time to have this conversation with us. I had come, in fact, as I was driving over here, I was trying to remember what it was that I actually went. You have an article in the Westminster Theological Journal. It is, I think it's from last fall, is that correct?
Fall 2015,
yeah. Yeah, I don't remember what the article was. I actually was referred, I think, to another article when I went to read the journal, and I saw yours. At the time, I was doing a lot of work, I still am actually, doing quite a bit of work on historic Adam, the reality or the truthfulness or the accurateness of the book of Genesis in terms of creation. And when I saw your article, I immediately went there and I read through it. It was, I read through it twice. It was fantastic. And the name of the article is Who was born
when Enosh was 90.
Yeah, that's right. Enoch was 90, right?
Enosh.
Enosh. I'm sorry. Enosh was 90. Tell us a little bit about this article.
Well, this article is really something that I've been thinking about and working on, at least in my mind, for about a decade, since about 2005, really. And so in 2005, well, let me go back to when I was 12 years old. I became interested in biblical chronology in the book of Genesis and the first 11 chapters of Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
When I was about 12, through a Sunday school teacher in junior high, and we covered the book of Genesis. In fact, we spent my entire 7th and 8th grade years in Genesis, and I became fascinated with the chronology in particular. So it's always been something I've been interested in. When I went to seminary in 2005, it was something that I wanted to take a step back from and look at with fresh eyes, because it became clear to me that most evangelical Old Testament scholars do not hold to an intact chronology in Genesis 5 and 11. So I wanted to know more about why. And I was somewhat familiar with the arguments, but I wanted to look at them in depth. And as I started looking into them, it didn't seem like they held up, and I thought maybe I was missing something, and so discussed it with my professors, and one of my professors in particular, a semanticist, a Hebrew scholar who's written on the subject, and so I picked his brain, and I was just not satisfied that there is a coherent exegetical argument that would allow for chronological gaps in Genesis 5 and 11. And the more I looked into it, the more I became convinced that no one had successfully argued. So I thought, well, this is something I want to think about more and read about more. Mm-hmm. And so in about 2005, 2006, it became sort of just a background hobby. I would do some reading and thinking. But in 2012, 2013, when I went back to seminary to get a second degree, I got more serious about it, and so I wanted to show, I wanted to provide an argument that was hopefully airtight. I think it is, showing that there's no way, semantically, exegetically, syntactically, that you can find any chronological gaps in Genesis 5 and 11. So that from Adam to Abraham, we can add up the numbers in those two chapters and find out when God created Adam. Everyone agrees, most evangelical, pretty much all evangelical scholars agree that we can date Abraham around 2000 or 2100 BC, somewhere in there, maybe a little closer to 2200 BC for some. But before Abraham, most evangelical Old Testament scholars would say we don't have any dates. We can't date anything, pretty much anything before that. So I wanted to set out to show that the historic church, and believing that we could date
Right.
Adam and the flood was correct, and the Jewish community before the 19th century and the church before the 19th century, the Jews going all the way back before Jesus, believed that we could read Genesis 5 and 11, those genealogies, as a chronology.
And just putting a time on it, that you're talking about all the way up through around the middle of the 1800s, probably, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
What, maybe till the 1870s? Maybe,
Yeah,
maybe.
the article that I critique in my paper, it was written by a Princeton professor, and was written in 1890.
Uh-huh.
And there was an article written about 17 years earlier, but by a guy named Frederick Gardner, trying to show that there were gaps, that we trying to stretch out the chronology, but it was not a very good argument, and so it didn't really take hold.
Mm-hmm.
But when Green's article came in 1890, it took hold.
You know, you of course counter, in your article, you counter really Green's theory. It's interesting that you mentioned the gentleman before him really didn't take hold. What was it about Green's that you think everyone was so quick to adapt, and I would say you're more generous than I am, but I would say uncritically accept?
Well, I would agree. I think it's been uncritically accepted. That was what really surprised me when I started looking at it in depth in 2005. I kept expecting to find something more, because the argument that Green put forth and that many have put forth since, it just doesn't hold up. And so I kept expecting to find, okay, well, here's what I'm missing. And never found that. And I came to the conclusion that it was just uncritically accepted. And you know, I don't know what all the motives were, but it appears when you look at the history that there was a strong desire among evangelical scholars to reconcile the Bible with sort of the prevailing scientific conclusions of the 19th century, of the 1800s. And not just Darwin's theory of evolution, but in fact I would say more so among the Princetonians and a lot of the evangelicals in Britain and at Princeton in America in the 1800s. A lot of it just had to do with the geology, the new geology, and the archaeology.
Mm-hmm.
It was very difficult, and many would say still is, very difficult to reconcile an intact chronology where you have an Adam who was created less than 10,000 years ago, with a lot of the archaeological conclusions and the geological conclusions.
Well, there's probably, you tackle one possible solution, not from an evolutionary standpoint, but more from maybe a 10,000 year history. But one of the things that we know now, I mean, if you're trying to accommodate the Word of God to the scientific paradigm of the day, you're going to be changing that every week, because I mean, literally the dating stuff has changed, and I'm not saying it hasn't even got longer out there, but I mean, you know, the reality is that stuff changes, and they know a lot of that stuff was inaccurate. So that, I mean, that's an interesting lesson that we should learn, that we never do. And we'll come back, because actually at some point here I want to talk to you about, you know, everyone's always accusing someone like you of trying to use the Bible as a scientific textbook, and let's talk about that. But before we get there, can I ask you a couple other questions?
Sure.
Yeah. What as I was reading through it, the chronological methodology used by Green and his supporters, as they, really, again, I want to be careful, because you're more generous than I am in these things. I always see nefarious, intent behind everything, and that's obviously not the case, but it makes good video. But but it seemed to me that they were using the same types of tactics created by biblical skeptics in terms of undermining the Old Testament reliability and even divine inspiration by appealing to non-existent sources, like for instance J. I mean, or just okay, we don't know an answer, or we don't like the answer, so we're going to say that there was some other source that this was borrowed from because we don't like the implications. You may not agree.
Well, since you're paying me the big bucks, I'll impute motives too.
Yeah.
No. Well, see, that's a hard one to answer. First, I would want to say with Green in particular, that the Old Testament scholar,
because he did just create something from nothing, right?
That's what I try to show in my paper. Yes,
right.
That he created a semantic principle, kind of just asserted it without any evidence, lexical evidence to support it, and then built an argument on that.
Okay,
so I do think, of course we all do that sometimes. We all have to come back and check our interpretation of the scripture. What I want to say about Green, though, through my research, I read some of his other works, and he was a good man, a godly man, a good scholar. He believed in the inerrancy of Scripture. He had a high view of the authority of Scripture. I would never doubt that. And he did a lot of good work in defending Scripture. Not that Scripture needs to be defending, but showing the truthfulness of Scripture against the skeptics, against the aspersions of skeptics, as he said it. And he did a fantastic job of that. So he was a conservative in every way. I think what he did in his article on the genealogies of Genesis 5 and 11, I think that hermeneutically that it is very problematic, and the reason that I was motivated to write this article on it is that I think it is a dangerous approach to Scripture, to Genesis, to the first 11 chapters of Genesis, to the genealogies in particular. I think that it has implications and maybe I would say unintended consequences.
The unintended consequences, that's something that you talked to me about, because my first thought is, because everywhere I look, it seems to me as though evolution is permeated every area of society. It doesn't matter what area you look at, it has been corrupted by evolutionary thinking. So my first thing is to go back and say it must have been because of Darwin, it must have been because of evolution. And you actually say it's not quite, that may not quite be accurate, because these are actually young Earth guys. Kinda.
Well, I would say this: in the second half of the 19th century. It wasn't so much Darwinism as it was the other, like I said, geology and archaeology. And in fact, about 21 years after Green wrote his article, B.B. Warfield published a paper, 21 or 31, I think it was in 1911, published his paper on the antiquity and the unity of the human race. And one of the things he says at the very beginning of the paper is he builds his argument on the illuminating article of Green, is what he calls it. So he thinks Green's paper was good. And what he goes on to show is that...
You're talking about Warfield?
Warfield goes on to show is that the human race is neither as young as the traditional interpretation of Genesis 5 and 11 requires, nor as old as the evolution, as the Darwinians would say. And he believed at the time that a lot of the science that had developed since Darwin had showed that we don't need hundreds of thousands, certainly not millions of years. And so he concluded in that essay that the chronology had gaps, but that really mankind may only be 10 to 20,000 years old. That would probably qualify, I guess, as young Earth.
Yeah, I would think.
On your standards.
it doesn't really, at some point, it doesn't matter, because for evolution to be accurate, it would
Right.
take billions.
Yeah, so he was not
No, I would say it would, there's no age of the earth that would allow for evolution to be
Oh,
accurate.
yeah, that's true. Yeah,
But,
right. Yeah.
but anyway, yeah.
Right. So there you have somebody who is denying the chronology, on the basis of problematic hermeneutical principles, I would say, that are dangerous, that are problematic, that have led to I would say have led to what we have now in the evangelical world, and opened the door for it instead of shutting the door on it. And a lot of the views on Adam, the denying the historicity of Adam. But they weren't, these guys, these Princetonians were not, trying to defend Darwin or even, a baptized version of his theory necessarily. Some were more or less sympathetic.
And they weren't trying to deny the special creation of Adam.
No, not at all.
Adam.
Absolutely. And that's we should make that very clear, that none of them, Hodge, Green, Warfield, none of those guys would ever have imagined.
No, that takes a special ignorance of modern theologians.
Right. So no matter what they were trying to say about the age of mankind, they believe that Adam was a historical figure, created specially, supernaturally by God at some point, and that Adam and Eve were at the headwaters of the human race, and that everyone is descended. The second part of Warfield's article is the unity of the human race, and so he.
Now, what you do, Jeremy, you go through the entire genealogies and chronology, and you talk. You say, listen, it's possible that there could be some genealogical gaps, right?
Right. Yeah.
But there can't be a chronological gap because it's the only. This is what amazed me. It is the only place in Scripture, and if I remember right, you point out, and I don't know what kind of research you had to do to find this. It's just amazing to me that it may be one of the only places in all of ancient.
Well, I tried to look for them and I couldn't find any, and I found another scholar who had done a lot of research in this, and he concluded that there weren't any either. I think it's accepted that there's not. No one's come up with any. If there are other genealogies in ancient Near Eastern literature that provide
the begetting
ages, they give the appearance of a chronology.
Right. So from that alone, you're saying God wanted to communicate something special and something important here, and in fact, you even say that He wanted it to build a chronology.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Absolutely. And so let me just the Green's argument is that in the Bible, genealogies sometimes have gaps, sometimes names are skipped over.
Right.
And the first place he goes to is Matthew's genealogy in Matthew 1. And it's, it's not debatable. There are gaps in Matthew 1. Everyone accepts that. So he goes to other places in the Old Testament as well. And he says, so if other genealogies have gaps, have names left out, why not Genesis 5 and 11?
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing that says that that there are definitely no gaps here. And then and what I want to say is, okay, maybe there are genealogical gaps. Maybe the 10 generations in Genesis 5 is not all that there were. There were other fathers, other patriarchs in between them. Mm-hmm. And so maybe Enosh, when he was 90, in the Masoretic text, in the Hebrew it says when he was 90 he had Cain, he fathered Canaan. Maybe Canaan was his grandson or great-grandson or great-great-grandson, whatever. Maybe there are gaps, but that does not mean that there were chronological gaps, because the text says that when he was 90 Canaan was born. He had Canaan. So when a grandfather has a grandchild, I had a grandson yesterday, or last year, I had my first grandson. Mm-hmm. What you're saying is my first grandson was born last year. And the text here says that when Enosh was 90, he had Canaan. So whether it was his son or his great-grandson, the chronology is intact because we know how old he was.
So there possibly could have been a genealogical skip,
possibly,
but not a Chronological.
Yeah, the chronology is intact the whole way.
Okay.
And the other thing I was surprised about when I really began to research this in earnest was that I couldn't find anybody saying that. I ended up finding someone that did say it after I'd written my paper and actually already submitted it. I found Goodenow, we'll talk about that later maybe, who did say this, but very few people had realized that, okay, there could be genealogical gaps, but not chronological gaps. And most of the arguments you see against Green's theory are trying to defend no genealogical gaps. I happen to think that there probably aren't any genealogical gaps either, but it's really beside the point.
Actually, by the time you prove that there's no chronological gaps, I don't understand why there would be anyway.
Yeah, we could go into that why there might be, but maybe they wanted to make each genealogical table 10 names. My view is that there are 10 names in each table because I think that Canaan should be in the Genesis 11 account. It's not in the Hebrew, it is in the Greek and the Septuagint. And so there are 10 generations in each one. Maybe they wanted to have 10 names, so they cut some names out. Who knows? But it really doesn't matter. The chronology is fixed, it's intact either way.
Okay.
I don't know, there was another part of your question that I completely forgot now that I got into
Well,
that. Sorry.
I'm sure we'll come back to this. But now you mentioned Goodenow. Actually, we started out saying that it was accepted uncritically, but that's not completely true because there was a tremendous written response to it that was submitted to that same journal. Correct?
Yeah.
But somehow it didn't get published.
Yeah, it got spiked, or however you want to call it. Goodenow, and I know what I was going to say now. You were talking about why your question had something to do with why the chronology is important, or why we want to make sure and establish and defend the chronology. And I was going to read something from Goodenow. Before I do that, I'm convinced that the reason the chronology is important is that chronology is the backbone of history. Some have said chronology is the soul of history. And if we lose our backbone, or if we lose our soul, then we're going to lose the sense that it's history as well. And I think we've seen that play out. What started as just an attempt to reconcile the history of Genesis 5 and 11 to scientific claims has, I think, opened the door to just denying the history altogether. And I think it's because we've lost our backbone. We've lost our soul when it comes to Genesis 1 through 11. And so while I think you can believe in the history of Genesis 5 and 11 without, and also believe that there are chronological gaps, I do think that it opens the door rather than shutting the door. And what I want to do is shut the door. So let's get our backbone back. And the best way to defend the historicity of Genesis 1 through 11, 5 and 11 in particular, is to reestablish the backbone, give it back its soul. And Goodenow predicted this. Goodenow wrote his article just 2 or 3 years after Green wrote his. He wrote a response. So Green published his article in the Bibliotheca Sacra journal, about the only journal going at the time, maybe the only evangelical journal, I guess, I don't know. And Goodenow, who was a scholar, a pastor, he wrote a handful of articles in that journal, wrote a handful of books, one on English language, and then he wrote this one that's in my hand on Bible chronology. He wrote a response, and this is I should put this in my article. He wrote a response and submitted it to the journal, same journal, And the editor accepted it and gave him an acceptance letter and said, we're going to publish it soon, within the year.
Mm-hmm.
And, but it never got published. Somehow someone didn't like it and it never got.
Mm-hmm.
And he points out a lot of the things, some of the things that I point out in my essay. And in particular, he points out that the genealogies might have genealogical gaps, but they can't have chronological gaps.
Mm-hmm.
But this is what he said in that essay that never got published. He put it in his book. He said, a straining of interpretation so far-fetched and forced against the obvious meaning would open the door to an explaining away of almost anything in Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote that in the early 1890s.
He was ahead of the curve on language deconstruction.
Yeah.
We complain about our universities, secular, take basically saying that what the author wrote didn't mean,
right.
He just interpreted it. So he's really prophesying that.
Yeah, I think he was a pastor, and I think his pastor's eyes saw the damage that this would do
Mm-hmm.
If we accept it. And it's unfortunate that his article, his response, never got published. It could have maybe curbed some of this, but that's exactly what's happened. Just about anything is possible in Genesis 1 through 11 now. We can make it say you have scholars teaching at even evangelical institutions or who claim to be evangelicals, mm-hmm. making the text say things that no one has ever seen,
right?
Ever.
And in fact, reflecting on Jesus and Paul, Jesus was a man of his own times. Yeah. Paul was a man of
the previous editor of the Westminster Theological Journal, not the one now, but Peter Enns, who used to teach at Westminster, and was the editor of one of the most solid evangelical theological journal.
A Presbyterian, I should add, not a Pentecostal.
That's right.
There we go. Okay, I just wanted to step. No, okay.
He now believes that Paul just got Adam wrong. He doesn't deny that Adam believed, that Paul believed that Adam was a historical figure.
Right.
But he just thinks Paul got it wrong.
Right.
So he's come a long way and in the wrong direction, I would say. But I would say Goodnow's right. It all starts and really, you asked me, why write this article?
Well, my original thought was, what would ever, I've given, even some very conservative people have bought into that, and and you read it and you go, okay, you just kind of go over it, because I didn't think about the ramifications at the time. But it amazed me that your passion level, it grew to the extent that you would actually...
Yeah, and I guess the real answer to that question is, I think it's an authority of Scripture issue. Yeah. Now, I want to be careful. A lot of people say that, and they might say things that I wouldn't say. I think you can disagree with me on this. Mm-hmm. I think, people who have published in favor of Green's article, for example, that you can have a high view of Scripture, and I wouldn't question somebody's view on inerrancy, just because they disagree with me on this. That's not what I'm claiming. Mm-hmm. But I do think that many of the interpretations of Genesis 1 through 11 have the effect of eroding our submission to Scripture and
I think
undermining the authority of Scripture.
I think that all of us are schizophrenic.
Yeah.
In some areas, right? So we'll believe one thing and maybe say something else, or vice versa. So I understand. I agree with that. But it does point to the presupposition that kind of flows through this is all of a sudden the presupposition changed. Mm-hmm. Maybe not the intent of the hearts of others, but when the presupposition, the paradigm through which they saw it changed, and I would argue that was because of the evolutionary theory that was gaining ground at the time. You may not agree with that.
Well,
maybe
I would just
may be
add to that, and the archaeology and the geology. There was a lot of things.
Well, I think that I think that there was a concerted effort to build that. Because Darwin wasn't the first. He was about the 10th person in over 100 years or more to come up. And in fact, some of the theories of evolution were far better than his. His was pretty not very very good when you look back. But so I think that there was this ongoing pressure, and they were kind of building block. But be that as it may, there's something that you had pointed out though that would account for some of a longer history that I have to tell you something. I only in passing was I aware of it, but never gave it any thought. I hate to admit that. I'll probably edit this part out. But I really hadn't thought about the differences or what caused the acceptance of one manuscript versus the Septuagint, for instance. And you argue in there that the Septuagint version with the longer begetting dates or ages is actually what the church had always accepted and always used all the way up to the Reformation, and we wanted to get away from those bad Catholics, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, or to put a positive spin on it, the Reformers were trying to get us back to the sources.
Okay.
They wanted to get us back to the Hebrew and the Greek.
Okay.
So explain. And so they, of course, the Hebrew text, the chronology in the Hebrew text is shorter than the one in the Septuagint. Mm-hmm. And they weren't the only ones. There were others before, but very few. Bede was one, and of course, in the Vulgate are the Hebrew numbers. The Vulgate was written after the Hebrew scriptures were corrupted. I believe they were corrupted in the 2nd century, and so Jerome based his Vulgate on the Hebrew. So it existed, but by and large, before the Reformation, it was just understood that the Hebrew had been corrupted.
So that adds like another
1500 years.
1500 years to the chronology. So you go back from 4000 to
4000 BC to around 5500.
55,
BC. That's when I believe God created Adam, in about 5500 BC.
So, well, great. So
that's in Appendix B, which ended up being a pretty long appendix, maybe its own paper in some ways. But I wanted to put it there.
It's well worth a pastor to read it. It's very well done. So I would say to read that. But
in some ways, that was the most exciting part. I mean, the passion really was grounded in the main part of the paper, establishing the chronology. But at some point along the way, that became really the most fun part, was looking into all of the text critical discussions that have been going on for centuries.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's the same with I guess this may be my hobby horse, the whole evolutionary thing, but when Darwin came along, there really was no change of facts. There was no scientific breakthrough. There was only a way that we viewed things, or the way that non-Christians viewed things. It seems like that was kind of almost the same thing with our biblical scholars in terms of the chronology. There was really no when Green published, there was no new theological
I would agree with that. There was nothing new. I mean, when you read his argument that genealogies can have gaps, it's almost like, we've always known that. I don't think anybody has ever disagreed that genealogies could have gaps, but the point is that no one has ever imagined that the chronologies in Genesis 5 and 11 could have gaps as a chronology.
Yeah.
And so... But there was nothing really new. It was just, I agree with you that there was almost like a frantic attempt to figure out how mankind was older than 6,000 years old, or even
they were really, actually, and you're right, to be fair to them, it wasn't so much of a longer, they wouldn't have identified with our longer type stuff.
Right.
But it was more they were trying to reconcile some of the stuff with the earliest Egyptian dynasties, right?
Yeah, that was one thing, too.
That and the flood, I guess.
Right, because and to me, that's of all of the challenges to biblical chronology from outside the Bible, whether it's archaeology, science, biology, anthropology. The Egyptian chronology is the most concrete one. It's the one that presents a real challenge, and not so much so that if we discover that the Hebrew text is right and the chronology is shorter and I'm wrong and it's Adam was created in 4000 BC, we just have to accept it and figure out how the Egyptian chronology works. But one of the advantages of the Septuagint chronology is it reconciles that problem, or whatever you want to call it, with ancient Near Eastern chronology. It's not going to answer, if you're an evolutionist or if you accept a lot of the archaeological datings that archaeologists do, it's not going to help you there, but it does answer the objection that having to do with Egyptian chronology.
Yeah, and realistic, again, none of these people, even with the gaps in not only in potential genealogical gap, but also chronology, none of them, I just want to reiterate, none of them were trying to make Adam, we're trying to portray an evolutionary path for man.
Yeah.
So that's an important but it's like it's what Goodenough said. The unintended consequences is anything happens from that.
Yeah.
Let me just ask you, in where you want to go with this. I'm just kind of curious. What do you say to people when their response is that you are, the Genesis is ancient literature. It's not a scientific textbook. So all you're trying to do is you're trying to impose, you're trying to use you're trying to use Genesis as a scientific foundation. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I hear that a lot. Genesis is not a science text, and I said, that I agree. I don't really know anybody who says it is. It's history though, and we should accept it as history. But the real irony in that is, to me at least, is that my view of Genesis 1 through 11 is the traditional view. It was the way that everyone interpreted it, before modern science, before the modern age.
Before Adam dressed like Eve to use a woman's bath. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, the charge there is that the literalists, or whatever they're called, are imposing modern scientific questions onto the text, questions that the text was not designed to answer. And but the real irony there is that these questions have been asked of the text since before Christ. People were putting together chronologies of the world based on a chronological reading of Genesis 5 and 11, of course a reading of Genesis 1 that assumed literal days. They've been doing this for centuries, millennia. And so am I supposed to believe that all of these chronologists, Jewish and Christian chronologists going back before Christ, were imposing modern scientific questions onto the text even before the modern era existed? And so I think it's the other way around. I think that the attempts to get away from the traditional exegesis of Genesis 1 through 11 is really what's imposing modern science onto the text and forcing it to conform to modern conclusions.
I think that the ancient world is imposing their scientific views on modern science, because this has always amazed me. There's some professors, especially at some well-known evangelical schools, said, this was a framework that allowed God to explain to an uneducated group of people. And I'm sitting here thinking, I don't think they have this right. I mean, when you look at the ancient world, if God wanted to explain creation through evolutionary methods, if he wanted them to understand it, he would have used evolution, because the world was awash in evolutionary theology. In some cases, much more advanced. You could argue than what we have today. So the normal way for an uneducated, just, a group of people that can't comprehend anything would be to use evolutionary imagery, because that's what the entire world was caught up with. This was something that lifted them far above that. It would have taken, to put it the way that Moses did it, inspired way, it would have created something out of, it was a new creation, really, for
yeah, and it's interesting you put it that way. I mean, the Greeks had some kind of idea of evolution, not Darwin's, but yeah, those ideas are not new.
Oh no, the Egyptians had and so did the Babylonians. They all had these very drawn out, extravagant evolutionary theories.
Well, the other thing I'd say too about that line of argument is it's very condescending toward the ancients. So Paul, sure, he thought Adam was a historical figure, but that's just because he wasn't enlightened. And if he were alive today, he would know better. Or the ancient Hebrews, this was their worldview, and so God was just, this was their background, this was the literature that they were reading, so God used that and worked within it because they couldn't handle, anything else or whatever. I find that very condescending and unnecessary, and I think there's a reason that the church really never approached the book of Genesis that way.
One of the reasons I wanted to talk with you, and I'm very thankful that I know that you pastor a church. I've taken time out of your schedule to share this with me and talk with me on the phone several times. But I was really thankful that you did a tremendous job from a scholarship. In research, biblical knowledge and understanding, languages. It was just an incredible job. And here's what I'm so thankful about. This is what I think is important. Pastors that I know that intuitively, well, I wouldn't say intuitive, maybe through the Spirit, know that God's word is true. They hold on to that, but they're getting no support from our seminaries. I should say no. But very little support from our seminaries now are undercutting every aspect of biblical authority, biblical truth, turning everything into a mishmash of whatever you want to believe and however you want to believe it, whatever your truth is. So they don't have anything to turn to that gives them the material needed to combat, Paul said to pull down all those vain philosophies that exalt themselves against the knowledge of God. And we do need those weapons to go out there, and pastors are looking for that. I'm thankful because you're a pastor, also working on multiple, PhDs or masters or wherever you're at. But you did this in an academic, theological setting very well, but also done from a pastor's heart. And I just want to say thank you. I think that is important for pastors, and I am thankful for your work in that regard. We're going to wrap it up with this. You're working on some other materials. We talked about that, and will you go on camera saying that you'll do another video interview with me?
If you'll drive here, that works out great for me.
You have great weather down here. I'll have to come when the Masters is on.
You don't want to come then.
No, don't.
Unless you got tickets. No, it's.
You're right across
the
river from Augusta.
Most people try to leave town during that week.
Yeah, golf worship goes on there, and you have church worship here. So well, anyway, Jeremy, if I left out anything that you'd like to get across before we wrap this up?
No, I want to encourage pastors and professors, academics to wear boldly the mantle of reproach that comes along with not only, in some cases, defending historical Adam, perhaps, but in evangelical circles, when you go further and defend chronology and a young earth and those kinds of things, I think that it's important that pastors and evangelical scholars do that. one of the crises of our age is a loss of confidence in the authority of Scripture.
Absolutely.
And and so I've heard a lot of well-meaning people say, well, for the sake of evangelism, we don't need to say anything about Genesis 1 through 11 that's going to come across, as fundamentalist, or we want people who have gone to university and who believe the earth and humanity must be far older than the traditional view of Genesis allows. We don't want to drive them away and be a stumbling block. I actually think it works the other way. I think what the world needs to see is Christians standing with confidence, with unshakable faith in the Word of God. Mm-hmm. That has power. Trying to explain away the first 11 chapters of Genesis mm-hmm. is powerless, and I think it's counterproductive. Mm-hmm. And it makes people think, well, they don't seem to really take their scriptures seriously. Right. I really do believe that that's how it comes across. And also for Christians, it undercuts our faith in God's Word. Yeah. And I've known people that start off questioning certain things about Genesis that I think are crystal clear, and then it leading to very destructive things. And I think there's a connection there. You never know why people do what they do, so you can't explain it, but I think there's a connection there in a lot of cases. And so I would encourage pastors to teach this sensitively, because mm-hmm. people have been taught certain things, but to teach it boldly. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to write this paper, is to give people a good argument to do it from, mm-hmm. to say, okay, actually here's why, give the scholarship for it.
Mm-hmm. So. We did a great job. Again, I'm with Pastor Jeremy Sexton, pastor of the Church of the Good Shepherd down here in North Augusta, South Carolina. SEC territory, not quite as holy as the Big Ten, but hey, there's some things that we got to put up with here to get to the good stuff. In all seriousness, his article, we're going to put a link to it under this interview. That'll take you probably to your website where you have that posted. It's in Westminster.
BibleArchaeology.org. It's not my website.
Oh, okay.
BibleArchaeology.org.
Yeah, Westminster Theological Journal. I think it was winter. Was it fall or winter of fall 2015? And the article was better than the one that I went there to read, because I can't remember what that was. So appreciate your time, Jeremy, and I recommend this to all the pastors watching. Have a good day.